A series of bizarre events make the Huangbai Village in front of us even more mysterious. And according to the clues provided by Xiaoka's mother, we can know that the name Huangbai Village comes from a small mountain behind the village, Huangbai Mountain. Since ancient times, there have been gold mines in Huangbai Mountain. But this is not the source of the strangeness. What really makes her feel there is a problem is the village chief's house. Because that house is built right at the foot of the mountain. So at this moment, old Taoist Ma couldn't help but be stunned after seeing the layout here. According to common sense, houses should never be built here. Even people with a little bit of brain would not do this. Therefore, he is already sure that there is a big problem with the village chief's house. Hearing this, Zhao Yi curiously asked why. Old Taoist turned back and explained, saying from a Feng Shui perspective, mountains govern people, water governs wealth, and the meaning of bright hall in front and mountain behind is that the mountain behind the house means backing. It can shelter from wind and gather energy and ensure family prosperity. Therefore, most houses are built with their backs to the mountain. And the reason why he said there is a problem with the village chief's house is because the house in front of us chooses to have the main entrance directly facing the mountain. The so-called opening the door to see the mountain is an obstacle. It will inevitably lead to stagnant vital energy and difficulty in dispelling evil energy. And this is also a major taboo in Feng Shui theory. Speaking of this, old Taoist looked at the house in front of him again, and then pointed to the small mountain in front of the house and said, "This mountain has trees growing on the top and is surrounded by cliffs on all sides, and there are many caves and grottos in the mountain. This means that the mountain's energy cannot be stored. It's just an empty mountain shape. And this situation will lead to the accumulation of yin energy and then generate evil influence. In addition, this mountain has steep and towering peaks with little soil and many rocks, sharp and rough scales, and no elegance at all. Therefore, in Feng Shui theory, this kind of mountain is also called greedy wolf." Hearing this explanation, Zhao couldn't help but sigh. How ominous! But Lao Ba didn't care so much. He bluntly said this is feudal superstition. Upon hearing that it was Master's comment, old Taoist immediately bowed and laughed obsequiously, explaining that this is traditional culture. But Zhongza suddenly became absent-minded because he found there seemed to be something in the distant dense forest. Everyone turned around to look in surprise, but saw nothing. However, as they approached, they then discovered that a statue of a deity was standing at the foot of the mountain. The statue held a stone tablet in its hand, inscribed with the 4 characters, ascend to immortality. But when they looked down, they found that the stone tablet below was written with the charitable deeds of Zheng Qingzhen, a divine doctor of the Qing dynasty. It's just that the name of this divine doctor doesn't seem to be very familiar. Lao Ba's brain circuit is really peculiar. He asked as if he saw a treasure. "Will this thing be demolished along with the village?" Old Taoist was a little puzzled and subconsciously replied, "Probably not." But his master's next question took another big turn. "Do you know this divine Dr. Zheng?" Old Taoist quickly shook his head upon hearing this. Just kidding. How could I possibly know someone from 100 years ago? He's just very curious. Just a doctor. Why would villagers sculpt him into the appearance of an immortal? Regarding this point, no one can understand. Just then, Zhao Yi's phone suddenly rang. No need to guess. His calls are basically from the temple. However, the voice from the other end of the phone startled him, because his elder brother actually asked him whether Gong Ling is with them. Upon hearing this, Zhao secretly thought things were going to be bad. He clearly remembered that after he told Gong Ling the information at that time, she said she was preparing to return, and also sent the location of Huangbai Village. Judging from this, Gong Ling probably didn't encounter any danger at that time. But why is it that even now, she hasn't returned to the temple yet? Uncle was silent for a moment after hearing this, and instructed, "Be careful," and then hung up the phone. Zhao Yi's face turned grim, and it also started to drizzle at this time. He dialed Gong Ling's phone again and again, but the response was always the same message: cannot be reached. Therefore, he thought of the big guy he encountered earlier and the bloodstained mask. He still clearly remembered that the big guy said, "Not my blood. This is not his blood. Whose blood could it be then?" Thinking of this, Zhao felt a little uneasy. He immediately walked towards the mountain, saying he was going to check the situation. At the same time, he told everyone not to move around here and wait for him to return. However, Zhao had just left when there was movement at the village chief's house. The big guy suddenly walked out, as if something was happening, and the bald village chief also followed out with a face full of complaints. Obviously, they were going together. This situation was naturally clearly seen by Zhongza and the others, but he didn't know that Master already had a bold plan at this moment. Since the village chief and his son have gone out, doesn't it mean that the house is empty at this moment? Thinking of this, he shouted go without saying a word. So a few people started climbing over the wall. Zhongza looked worried. Isn't doing this equivalent to breaking the law? Unexpectedly, Master didn't care at all, saying just be low-key and don't get discovered. But what Zhongza worried about was far more than this. Because if they leave like this, what if Zhao comes back and can't find anyone? Who would have thought that Master didn't consider this at all? Because he knows, in terms of finding people, Zhao is the best at it. However, when they successfully climbed into the yard, they were again stunned by the scene in front of them. Because in front of them, there was also a second wall standing. Fortunately, the second wall was not closed. Old Taoist took the lead, shouting a few complete English phrases and led everyone to rush over. As expected, it was pitch black inside the house. There should be no one there. Lao Ba didn't care so much, and directly prepared to go into the house. Zhongza was immediately startled. He hurriedly stopped Master, because he wanted to understand what is the purpose of everyone breaking into the village chief's house like this. Hearing this, Lao Ba frowned fiercely, because he thought of the big guy before. The scene of him suddenly appearing behind them without anyone noticing. So at this moment, he wants to figure out one thing. However, just as he was about to push the door, he was suddenly stopped by Old Taoist again. He was puzzled in his heart. Why are these two disciples so worrying? He saw Old Taoist staring straight at the courtyard door behind him, then suddenly ran back. This scene made Lao Ba confused and shouted in confusion, "Majima, what are you doing?" But Lao Dao ignored him. Instead, he looked out through the crack of the door. And with this look, Lao Dao was immediately scared into a cold sweat. He looked as if he had discovered something extremely terrifying and fell to the ground, trembling. This strange scene startled both of them. They hurried over. But Old Taoist suddenly sat up, and with a gloomy face, he told them his discovery. Because he already knew why the village chief's house was built here. Earlier, they had already seen that the village chief's house has 2 walls. If you add the house door, it is equivalent to having 3 doors. And this, in Feng Shui theory, is called triple doors. Double doors are for seeing the sky. Double doors are for seeing the mountain. As for this 3rd door, it is for seeing immortals. So the owner of this house wants to become an immortal. At this moment, Zhao is still dialing Gong Ling's phone again and again. He hoped to be on the mountain to find Gong Ling's tracks. But just then, a broken tree trunk nearby caught his eye. Beside it were scattered bloodstains. Gloomy-faced, he crouched down, wiped some blood, and sniffed it. Despair filled his heart at that moment. He knew that earlier that day, he'd advised Gong Ling against acting because she hadn't rested enough. Gong Ling had said she was only gathering intel, but the current situation made him deeply regret his daytime decision. So, he could only silently pray for Gong Ling's safety. But what he didn't expect was, at this very moment, a faint light was slowly approaching. He didn't turn around, but he knew who it was. So he turned and asked, "Have you seen Gong Ling?" The miner-like Shang figure remained silent, silently pointing in a direction. Today was only Zhongza's first day as a disciple, but he didn't expect that very night his master would lead him and his new junior apprentice to break into a home. Was this a case of a master's moral failing or blatant disregard for the law? However, the master's idea stemmed from seizing the right opportunity. The village chief's house was empty at this moment. Plus, he had a long-standing question in his mind. But what he didn't expect was, sneaking into the hall with his 2 apprentices, he found the large room was completely empty. How could it be like this? Zhongza was also puzzled by the sight. But at this point, he cared less about the room's emptiness and more about his master's silent motive for breaking into the house. Unexpectedly, the master didn't answer. Instead, he touched his brow with the back scratcher. He seemed to be sensing something. The master's eyes suddenly lit up, as if activating some secret technique. After a moment, he revealed their purpose to Zhongza. He wanted to know what exactly that big guy was. Zhongza was startled, because in his master's words, the word person was absent. Just then, old Taoist Ma rushed over. He urgently told the master to follow, claiming a special discovery. He had already deduced that the village chief built this house for immortality. If so, the house must hold a secret. So he carefully searched every corner, as expected, finding something peculiar. The group arrived at a room that was originally locked, but inside was a descending staircase. Zhongza peered in, seeing only darkness. Looks like a deep tunnel. Old Taoist added, this tunnel was sealed by 2 stone slabs beside it. He tried to lift them, finding them incredibly heavy. You'd need a crane to move them. He concluded, the house's secret lies in this tunnel. If so, let's explore it. Hearing this, Master immediately took the lead and entered. Old Taoist, well-equipped, had a flashlight. Finally, they wouldn't have to navigate in the dark. The tunnel was long, with a faint drip of water echoing. However, even with Master and Old Taoist nearby, Zhongza felt an increasing chill. He started shivering uncontrollably, his teeth chattering. Zhongza was puzzled. Even if he was nervous or scared, he shouldn't be showing it this much. Stranger still, amidst these feelings, he also sensed a hint of excitement. Master ignored these signs and poked his brow again with the back scratcher. Then he instructed his apprentices to stay close, and no matter what, they must follow his orders. Then he took the lead, heading deeper into the tunnel. As they walked, Zhongza remembered Zhao Yi's words, that he trusted CHU Wu's intuition. Could this strange feeling be a Shang person's intuition? Or maybe it was excitement about finding a way to become normal again. But these feelings were probably just wishful thinking. Better to focus on the tunnel ahead. Old Taoist estimated this tunnel should lead towards Huangbai Mountain. Zhongza was a bit shocked, but Master suddenly agreed, right? Because a railway track appeared before them. Seeing this tunnel must be an old mine shaft. The village chief probably connected it to his house to secretly transport gold. As they talked and walked, they were suddenly stunned by the sight ahead. Before them stood a massive Paifang archway. This sight even unsettled Old Taoist. Despite his extensive reading, he'd never seen anything like it. But then, Old Taoist exclaimed again, pointing ahead and shouting to Master, urging them to come quickly. Because here, there's an upward staircase. Master stared into the darkness above, quietly activating his secret art. The next moment, he declared, "It's up there." Zhongza was baffled. Master always spoke in riddles. It was infuriating. But just as he was about to ask, he felt something strange underfoot. Looking down, he saw a puddle had appeared under his feet. Strange. Where did this water come from? As they stood there puzzled, a rumbling sound came from the staircase. The next instant, a torrent of water rushed towards them. Terrified, Master yelled, "Run!" But they hadn't run far before the flood water caught up. The situation was dire. They couldn't worry about anything else and swam desperately with the current. Master's back scratcher was long enough. In the chaos, he grabbed a stone wall. Once steady, he began shouting his apprentices' names. Unlike before, this time he called out the correct names. Just then, Old Taoist was swept along by the current. Master grabbed him immediately, even letting go of his back scratcher as it was swept away. Zhongza's situation was grim. He had sunk beneath the surface, looking up at the faint light above. It felt like an abyss. He struggled to swim upwards, but the distance seemed to grow. Then, he seemed to see his loved ones. A surge of emotion made him gulp down water. He couldn't take another breath. But just as he was about to give up, a familiar large hand suddenly pulled him up. Using this force, Zhongzha finally surfaced. Looking back, he saw only raging floodwaters. No one else was there. Was it a hallucination? Confused, he could only swim towards shallower water to catch his breath. But then, he suddenly remembered his master and old Taoist Ma. Zhongzha broke into a cold sweat. He quickly turned to look around, but no one was in sight. Just then, he saw a red wooden hand floating nearby. That was indeed Master's personal belonging. He never let it out of his sight usually. At that moment, Zhongzha panicked. A sudden, inexplicable force surged up. He immediately plunged back into the water without hesitation. Fortunately, it wasn't long before he saw Master's silhouette. Judging by the looks of it, Master had already drowned. Without a second thought, Zhongzha grabbed Master's arm and hauled him out of the water. Only after dragging Master to a safe area did he realize he was completely exhausted. But Master in this condition couldn't be considered successfully rescued at all. After Zhongzha called out a few times, he found that Master was still motionless, anxious and worried. He quickly leaned down to feel for Master's heartbeat. Then he immediately started chest compressions on Master. Whether it was because he was too nervous, Zhongzha couldn't hear Master's heartbeat. So at that moment, his heart was filled with despair. He didn't want to see anyone else die because of him, especially when the person in front of him was his kind master who took him in. Knowing he was a jinx, Zhongzha had already prayed in his heart no less than 10,000 times, only hoping that Master would not die. Then in the next moment, a stream of water squirted right into his eyes. Great! Master is responding! But before he could get excited, he saw Master roll his eyes at him and say in an annoyed tone, "The heart is on the left side." But Zhongzha didn't care about any of that at this moment, because it was a blessing that Master was okay. Thinking of this, he happily pressed down hard a few more times, making Master wince in pain. But just then, a familiar voice suddenly came from behind him, telling Zhongzha not to worry. Zhongzha turned his head sharply and saw Zhao the sitting not far away. Beside him was his junior brother, Maleo Dao. Zhao the said with a smile, "We are the people you can't jinx to death." But Zhongzha acted as if he hadn't heard anything, calling out Zhao Yi's name in a trembling voice, as if he had seen a family member. Unfortunately, he didn't know how to express his emotions, so he had to ask Zhao the why he was here. Zhao the smiled without saying a word, raising his finger and pointing behind Zhongzha, saying someone had led him here. Zhongzha looked back and realized that behind him, there was actually a miner standing there. He remembered now. This miner was the very Shang who wanted to guide them earlier. But why would he bring Zhao the here? Before Zhongzha could ask and understand, the awakened Liao Dao suddenly started shouting loudly, because he discovered, not far in front of him, there was actually a foot. Or more precisely, it should be a leather boot. This discovery made everyone serious. They all thought of the accident that Little's mother had once told them about. She said that about 10 years ago, an accident occurred in the Huangbai Village mine. At that time, the mine was flooded by underground water, drowning many miners. But the village chief used money to bribe officials and suppress the matter. He not only silenced the families of the deceased miners, but also coerced and lured other miners to continue working in the mine. It was also around that time that Little's mother's family escaped from the village. As far as she knew, the bodies of those deceased miners have still not been found. And now, what was in front of Zhongza and the others was dozens of skeletal remains. They fell silent, as if mourning for these dead. Zhongza looked at the surging underground water behind him and had a bad premonition in his heart. And Zhao also spoke out the truth at this moment. It seems someone wants to use the same method to bury us here too. The sudden underground water backflow in the mine was exactly the same as the incident 10 years ago. This strange situation makes it easy to guess that someone must be playing tricks in the dark. However, this time Zhongza and the others were able to survive, thanks to the Shang, who had been silently guiding them. Perhaps this is also driven by some obsession of his, hoping that the bones of himself and his deceased brothers could one day see the light of day, and their grievances could be redressed. But he didn't expect this persistence to last for 10 years. And now, the time he can remain in this world is running out. Looking at the dozens of skeletons in front of them, everyone felt like a huge stone was pressing down on their hearts. Even Liao Dao, who was originally panicked, became furious, directly saying that the village chief's sins were heinous. But if it was really the village chief who released the water, then what was his purpose? What was the point of drowning so many miners for no reason? The more Zhongza thought about it, the angrier he became. Not to mention the village chief had so many lives on his hands. Just the act of trying to drown them in the mine now was unforgivable. So Zhongza immediately clamored to go out and call the police, hoping to bring the criminals to justice. Liao Dao nodded vigorously upon hearing this, firmly saying one word, yes, watching his two apprentices full of fighting spirit. Lao Bo was too lazy to disturb them, turning his head to ask Zhao what he had been doing in the mountains earlier. Zhao didn't hide anything and spoke out his worries because Gong Ling had mysteriously disappeared. At the moment he heard these words, Lao Ba's pupils suddenly constricted, but in an instant he returned to his usual laziness. He held up his back scratcher and gave Zhao the reasonable analysis, which was that there was no signal in the mountains, or the phone was out of power. Even, or maybe she is driving, and it's inconvenient to answer the phone. Speaking of this, he hesitated a bit and glanced at Zhao, adding the last point. Or maybe she just doesn't want to answer your call. But after saying this, he immediately became serious again, saying there was no need to overthink it. After all, she is Gong Ling, the top sister of our Lisong temple. And indeed, this reason was irrefutable. Zhao the pondered for a moment and instantly put on a happy face, showing an expression of sudden realization. This made Lao Ba quite satisfied. But in times of joy, there's always someone to spoil the fun. Zhongzhao appeared with a panicked expression, exclaiming about the failure of their evil extermination plan. The reason was simply that they were trapped in the mine, unable to get out. As for swimming back through the water, that was completely impossible. Could it be they have to climb out from above? Unexpectedly, Zhao said with a smile that they couldn't leave yet, because before going out, they still had to figure out this mountain. Looking at Zhao Yi's calm and composed appearance, it seemed like escaping the mine was just a piece of cake for him. Speaking of this, Zhao suddenly turned his head and asked Lao Ba if he had sensed something. Actually, sensing things, Lao Ba had hardly stopped. He pointed to the opposite bank of the river, saying that what he sensed was ahead. Moreover, the stone steps they had seen earlier, leading upwards, also led to this place. It's just that there's a mountain wall in front of them. How should they get past it? Lao Ba muttered with his chin in his hand. Could it be that we need to order takeout and have them deliver something that makes noise? But just as they were pondering, Leo Dao beside them started shouting again. It turned out that he had found the long plank he had been carrying on his back. Previously, he had always wrapped this thing in cloth. Those who didn't know might have thought he was carrying a Zhuan heavy ruler. Now, unwrapping it to take a look, they realized that inside were actually 5 shovel-like tools. Leo Dao proudly introduced, saying that he had once been exposed to some tomb raiding techniques, and these were his handy weapons for moving mountains. Hearing these words, Zhao and Lao Ba frowned in unison. But in the next moment, they, along with Zhongzha, became Leo Dao's cheerleading squad. They saw Leo Dao transform into a human tunneling machine. Before long, he had chiseled out a big hole in the mountain wall in front of him. Before their eyes were patches of stalactites, like a spacious natural cave. And Lao Ba obviously didn't have time to pay attention to these. He stared straight ahead, saying that what he sensed was right there. And so, this word sensing that he keeps mentioning really worried Zhao Zhaja. Isn't sensing something only found in fantasy novels? But what's going on with you? Seeing Zhao Zhaja turn into a curious baby again, Zhao smiled. He explained, their sensing is mainly about detecting Shang Qi. Now Zhongzha was even more confused. Chamber of Commerce. Is such a thing hidden in the mine? Of course. Zhao didn't realize Zhongzha had misunderstood and continued to explain on his own. He said this Shang Qi is the unique energy belonging to Shang, or Shang beings. Usually, the stronger the Shang's will, the more intense the Shang Qi becomes. Unfortunately, even if Shang Qi is strong, it will eventually be destroyed by sunlight. Therefore, even when possessing a human body, Shang doesn't dare to come out during the day. Just like that miner who led them just now. His Shang Qi is already very weak, almost non-existent. That's why earlier, Zhao said he didn't have much time left. Because once a Shang loses Shang Qi, it will completely disappear. And Chu Wu senses Shang, and Shang beings based on Shang Qi, redundant in English, combined with previous line. Hearing this explanation, Zhongza finally understood a little bit. But he didn't expect that even he would have Shang Qi. Subsequently, he learned from Zhao where the Shang Qi of Shang beings comes from. That is, every time a Shang being releases Shang to the outside world, a large amount of Shang Qi is also produced. And during Shang transformation, the amount of Shang Qi produced is even more terrifying. Therefore, these are the main reasons why Shang beings are extremely dangerous. Speaking of this, Zhao suddenly looked serious. He said that deep in Huangbai Mountain, there is a place with extremely dense Shang Qi. Just then, Lao Ba suddenly held out his hand to stop them, signaling everyone to stop and be quiet. Because not far in front of him, there was a figure mining. This scene immediately startled a few of them. They quickly hid and watched from a distance. Zhongza asked hesitantly, "Is this the Shang who led us earlier?" Zhao shook his head, his eyes a bit unfriendly. And Lao Ba was very bold at this moment. He quietly crept behind the dark figure, picked up the back scratcher, and patted the miner on the shoulder. Unexpectedly, the miner suddenly seemed to lose consciousness and fell straight to the ground. Only then did they realize that the miner was just a corpse. If they guessed correctly, it must be one of the miners who died in the accident 10 years ago. But how can a corpse move? Moreover, it can repeat the mining work day after day for 10 years. This is really puzzling. However, Zhao suddenly squatted down and directly pulled open the corpse's hair. Sure enough, in the corpse's temple, there was indeed a golden object. He didn't expect that someone would embed gold in the corpse's temple. Zhao stood up with a serious face and tossed the gold nugget to Lao Ba. Because inside, there is a special energy. Lao Ba's eyes widened in shock as soon as he sensed it. How can there be Shang Qi in this? Zhao Yi didn't know either. In fact, they had found similar gold nuggets earlier when burying the Shang boy, redundant in English, combined with previous line. At that time, they thought this Shang Qi might be because of long-term contact with Shang, leading to contamination. But looking at it now, this guess seemed to be a bit inaccurate again. Could it be said that Shang Qi originally exists in gold? As soon as this guess came out, Zhao Zhaja was once again shocked and widened his eyes. What's going on? Didn't you just say earlier that Shang Qi only exists in Shang or Shang beings' bodies? How could gold possibly have Shang Qi? Could it be that someone deliberately injected it in? As soon as this unintentional question came out, Zhao was suddenly startled, as if he had discovered something incredible. And after Lao Ba heard this, he also rarely reprimanded him. Don't talk nonsense. Because he thought this was absolutely impossible. After the group mourned for the deceased for a moment, they continued to walk into the cave. But as soon as they walked out of the cave entrance, they were shocked by the scene in front of them. They didn't expect that there were more minor corpses working tirelessly day and night here. Everyone's faces turned gloomy. No matter who or what identity, committing such evil deeds is unforgivable even for 100 deaths. Lao Ba was angry. He asked angrily, "Damn it, what the hell is going on?" This question echoed in the empty cave. But unfortunately, the only people who heard it were those around him. Perhaps
老爸问的不只是事件的幕后主使。
Lao Ba was asking more than just about the mastermind behind the incident. At this moment, the sensing became stronger and stronger. For some reason, Lao Dao suddenly coughed.
而对于这两个新收的徒弟，
And for these two newly accepted disciples, Lao Ba solemnly warned,
还说一会儿一旦遇到突发状况，
Don't worry about anything else. Just run first. Hearing this, Zhongzha felt uneasy, but he didn't say anything more. Not long after, they followed the miners and came to a cave entrance emitting blue light. Lo Dao at this moment was so shocked that he couldn't speak clearly, because in front of them there was a huge alchemy furnace. The furnace was suspended above the water by iron chains, and below the furnace, a cluster of blue flames was dancing. They didn't expect that Lao Dao's previous Feng Shui theory prediction was actually true. Someone really wanted to become immortal through this. Just as they were stunned, ripples suddenly appeared on the water surface. Immediately after, Zhongzha heard a strange voice in his ear. The voice seemed very anxious, constantly urging Zhongzha to leave quickly. And Zhongzha was also terrified to hear it. He looked left and right, but couldn't find who was talking to him. But that voice kept lingering and echoing in his ears. And the last time something spoke to him like this, it seemed to be that little boy in the yin house. This remote mine is rich in gold, but the workers are all dried corpses who have been dead for 10 years. What's even more outrageous is that deep in the mine, there is a huge alchemy furnace hanging over black water. The blue flames under the furnace are even floating on the water. This scene made the knowledgeable old man slap his thigh and say, as expected, now that an alchemy furnace has been found in the mine, plus the strange layout of the village chief's house, it proves that the inference that someone here wants to become immortal is correct. But even if he spoke eloquently, Zhongzha on the side didn't listen to a single word, because at this moment, a faint voice was whispering in his ear, telling him to leave here quickly.
在萧爷喊了一声后，
After Zhao the shouted, at that moment,
所以也就没有明说。而老道这边仍旧是滔滔不绝讲个没完。
and Lo Dao was still talking non-stop, his words full of classical flavor.
可这一通之乎者也下来，
But after this long speech full of classical Chinese, none of the people present understood. Speak human language to me. This time, Ma Dezin immediately chickened out. He quickly summarized his long speech just now into 2 words, alchemy. Now Lao Bo was annoyed. After talking for so long, you're just repeating yourself here? Who can't see that this is alchemy? Lao Dao knew he was in the wrong, and faced with his master's reprimand, he naturally bowed his head to show his mistake. Of course, this farce did not arouse Zhao Yi's interest. Instead, he silently went into a daze, because when he first heard the name Huangbai Village, his elder brother told him that Huangbai art, it's the Taoist priest's alchemy that turns elixir into gold and silver. Could it be said that? Is there any connection here? But the old Taoist's mouth clearly can't stay idle. He stared at the furnace in the pool, exclaimed in surprise. Because whether it's the village chief's house or the furnace in this mine, both go against Feng Shui principles. Huangbai Mountain is inherently an extremely ominous and fierce greed wolf peak. Plus, the mountain chamber is empty of form and true energy. Instead, it's become a dangerous place that gathers yin and accumulates evil energy. This approach, is it really for making elixirs? Hearing this, Zhongza looked again at that flickering blue flame. What exactly is going on with this flame? It can actually float on top of black water. Could it be? Is this black water oil? Speaking of this, he quickly stopped talking because he thought of something terrible, which is that oil breeds some greedy mold. But even so, he still couldn't resist reaching out his hand, wanting to get some black water to study it. But Lao Ba immediately stopped him with his back scratcher. After all, black water is an unknown substance. How could he let his apprentice rashly take risks? And Zhao the added, this black water contains an extremely strong concentration of death energy. But after he said this, the old Taoist suddenly changed his expression and started coughing immediately. He even coughed more and more intensely. Zhongza, as the senior apprentice, stepped forward without hesitation and hurried over to express concern. The old Taoist, holding his forehead, said he felt short of breath as soon as he entered this area, and now he had a splitting headache. Hearing this, Zhao Yi knew what was going on. He said this was a negative effect from the death energy, and told Zhongza to help the old Taoist to the back to rest for a while. Watching the backs of the two men, Lao Ba suddenly became a bit curious. This new Za doesn't seem to be affected by the death energy. Huh? Zhao the was too lazy to correct the name. Instead, he said somewhat helplessly, Zhongza is a death-touched person to begin with. How could he be affected by it? But he reminded Lao Ba, telling him to keep a closer eye on Zhongza. Because just now, Zhongza's eyes were blue. And what does blue mean? As CHU Wu members, they all knew very well. So now, they could only keep as close an eye on Zhongza as possible to prevent this guy from suddenly changing. Then Zhao the rolled up his sleeves and reached towards the pool of black water. The moment he touched the water's surface, he used his superpower, Jinglei. Blue lightning surged downwards, and in the blink of an eye, it covered Zhao Yi's entire arm. Then, the instant he dipped his arm into the black water, it even sparked dazzling lightning. This commotion naturally caught Zhongza's attention. He asked with concern what had happened. Zhao Yi got up with a gloomy expression and said that Zhongza had been right about something, which is that the death energy in this gold is indeed artificially injected. Hearing this, Lao Ba immediately jumped up and down in anger. Just soaking gold in water gives it death energy? Do they really think they're pickling pickles here? He used his back scratcher to scoop up some black water and examined it carefully. He really couldn't figure out how it was done. Zhao the took a light sniff and already discerned the substances contained in the water. It contains minerals, rust, blood, putrescine, and endless pain and despair. In short, this is a pool of corpse water. After saying this, everyone fell silent at the same time. Only the sound remained in the mine, the slow, creaking sound of wheels. they saw a minor mummy walking along the tracks beside them. He pushed a mine cart full of gold nuggets to the edge of the black water, and then dumped them all in at once. These gold nuggets would surely attract crowds of buyers if placed outside. But appearing here now, it weighed heavily on their hearts. After dumping the gold nuggets, the miner turned and walked away, as if the people beside him didn't exist at all. Watching his back, Zhong's felt a sense of sorrow. Why are they still working even after death? The question might seem naive, and the answer might be very simple too. Lao Ba knew what Zhongza was thinking, so he asked if he remembered the method of destroying death energy he had taught him. When Zhongza heard this, he suddenly realized. He remembered the temple that Master mentioned during his demonstration. Lao Ba nodded. That's right. The temple is an extraordinary acupoint outside the meridians, a person's fatal point. Similarly, it's also the weak point of the death touched, because death energy is concentrated here. And this is why these corpses have gold nuggets placed in their temples. So, someone must want to turn these corpses into death-touched-like beings, and then control them. Hearing this, Zhongza's voice trembled slightly, and he couldn't help but clench his fists. A terrible thought crossed his mind, which is that the village chief drowned these miners just to get endless labor from them. That's probably right. But the fear is that it's not that simple. If it were just simple gold mining, there would be no need for such an elaborate setup. So, in Zhao Yi's opinion, there must be a bigger scheme at play here. Lao Ba nodded in agreement. He voiced an even more terrifying guess, which is that these things probably aren't being done by the village chief, but that there's another expert directing everything from behind. Because when we met the village chief earlier, he sensed that there wasn't a trace of death energy in the village chief's body. At this, Zhongza was shocked. If there's someone else, then things are really serious. Unbeknownst to them at that moment, they were already being secretly watched. If any keen-eyed viewers would surely notice that the outline of this perspective looks familiar. At this moment, Zhongza felt uneasy. He anxiously asked Zhaoda, "What should we do now?" Actually, Zhaoda didn't know either. He could only say, "Let's take it one step at a time." He decided to focus on the task at hand first, and investigate what kind of elixir is being refined in this furnace. Zhongza felt much relieved hearing this, and immediately prepared to go help. But just then, that faint voice sounded in his ears again. This time, he was caught completely off guard. He was so startled, he looked around in alarm. Under Zhao Yi's curious questioning, Zhongza asked back in confusion, "Didn't you guys hear it?" Hearing this, Zhao and Lao Ba immediately became alert, and quickly asked Zhongza what exactly he had heard. Puzzled, Zhongza tilted his head and listened carefully, and realized that the faint voice was telling him to hurry away. At the same time, his pupils suddenly turned blue. In that instant, he located the direction the voice was coming from, which was beneath the black water in front of them. Hearing this, Zhao and Lao Ba simultaneously looked at the water's surface, and simultaneously closed their eyes to sense it. After spotting that faint blue glow, their expressions changed. Didn't expect it. There really is something under the water. Zhao didn't speak, but turned to look at the massive chains submerged in the water. Then, without hesitation, he grabbed one, and even infused it with thunderous power. After a moment, he suddenly called out, "Lao Ba." Lao Ba immediately understood. He immediately reached out and scooped up several chains. When Zhongza saw this, he quickly stepped forward to help, nimble and quick. But the old Taoist sat behind, silent. It was unclear whether he was reciting Feng Shui principles or had other thoughts on his mind. Before long, with the efforts of the three of them, the chain on the shore grew longer and longer, and whatever was under the water was about to surface. With a strong pull from Zhongza, a huge red object was pulled out of the water. Looks like this is the source of the death energy in the water.